My name is Bernardo Odit. I work for the Kenya Forestry Research Institute as a research scientist, and I also work in an ESPA-funded project called Spaces, where I'm working with a number of others in the social research team. And I'm here to present this paper titled A Basic Needs Approach to Understand the Complex and Changing Link Between Ecosystem Services and Wellbeing. So, just straight on, because I'm told I have only 15 minutes. Spaces project is sustainable poverty alleviation from coastal ecosystem services, and there are several institutions involved, as listed, and the sites are in northern Mozambique and in the coastal Kenya, and the south coast and around Mombasa. We are in 4 sites. So some of the sites are rural sites and some are urban sites, just for comparative analysis. In the Spaces project, we are looking at, this is a conceptual framework for the Spaces project. We are looking at how to link ecosystem services to human well-being. And there are several scientists doing several activities, research along the chain. Some are dealing with looking at ecological dynamics, determining the levels of takeoff, that the stocks that are there. And some of us are doing the human well-being research, the social dimensions of the whole. Some are doing value chains. So most research starts from the other end, looking at how ecosystem services contribute to human well-being. But for this particular research, we are trying to look at, to understand the human needs and how that can link backwards to the ecosystem services. So it's a bit of a different approach that we are trying to apply. But just for simplicity, the chain is very complex. We can't say that it's a straightforward chain, it's one directional. It's very complex. It's a web of things here and different things linking to each other. But for simplicity, the conceptual framework just tries to make you understand what we are trying to deal with. Just looking at from stocks and how the ecological dynamics, the human inputs that are needed, and how we value those particular goods and services, and the issues of access to meet the needs, which finally ends up improving the well-being of the people we are working with. So this is just for illustration. So don't take it that this is how it should be. It's very complex. Now, we are in those sites, as I mentioned. About these sites are in the coast. These are coastal sites. We're looking at coastal landscapes and seascapes. These are communities who depend on this particular ecosystem for different services, for fishery, for mangroves, and so on. It's also a fishing culture. Generally, fishing is a predominant economic activity among these particular communities. But of course, it's not just fisheries. There are several other things that happen in the same place. Because fisheries attract other economic activities. The same people who do fisheries do other things seasonally. Sometimes the fish is not there, they do other things. But there are people who also do business. There are people who do other activities related to fisheries, transportation, people who do repair of fishing nets and so on. So you find around the fishing community, there are several things that are going on. There are also seasonal changes within these areas, as I've mentioned. There are also high levels of poverty. The poverty levels are quite high among both communities, both in Kenya and in Mozambique. There are also competing interests and resource use conflicts among the different communities. These areas also have international and local tourism because they are coastal, and there are so many interesting touristic areas that people come from outside the country to visit. There are also transboundary issues, migrant fishing, different policy regimes, people crossing from different countries where there are different policy regimes. They cross to other countries and do, for example, dynamite fishing in Tanzania. When they cross to Kenya, that brings conflict with the Kenyan authorities. Now, let's look at, to understand the human need, we need to understand, have a theoretical framework, and we borrowed from Doyle and Gore. Doyle and Gore developed a theory that try to understand human need. And basically, they were saying that this theory was construed, and the reason why we chose this theory is because it's universally accepted across different disciplines. When people try to understand this particular issue of human need, they are borrowed from this particular theory to try to understand what does it really entail when we talk of human needs, and how do we meet these particular human needs. They are universal, but how they are met differs from place to place. It's context specific. But the needs are universal. And I'll just... So, according to Doyle and Gore, there are two primary basic needs, health and autonomy. So when health and autonomy issues are met among people, then their needs will be satisfied and they'll be happy. Their quality of life will be okay, and their well-being will be satisfied. And that will ensure that they participate in different economic activities and social activities. But these two men, as I'll show you later, the two, health and autonomy, those are the primary needs, but under them, the health issue, there are several other needs. Nutrition, protection, a healthy and non-hazardous environment, appropriate health care, issues of security, education, and so on. So, in trying to understand this, we try to validate that universal list by Doyle and Gore through discussion with a larger group to try to validate if these needs or criteria of needs also apply to the same site we are working with. And in that big discussion, we are able to come up with several of these needs. I mean, these are discussions that we had, and we asked people who is doing well in that community on the right and who is doing badly. So there are several issues they mentioned, like they are employed, they have good health, they have business, they are self-reliant, they own boats, they own certain assets like machines, they own gears, they own dhows, they own buildings, they own cars and transport and so on. The others who are not doing very well cannot take kids to school, for example. They have bad family relations. They are renting houses. They don't have particular assets. They have no savings. They are extravagant. They have no diverse income, and so on. So through this discussion, we had a long list of these particular needs, which we now had to, if you look at this, in trying to validate those needs, there are several issues that come up. And then we try to categorize them into smaller groups, and then we discuss in detail. If it's, for example, education or health or physical security or economic security, for example, in that particular community, how do they understand it? What issues are there? As a community, how do they go through these particular issues? So as facilitators in that research, all we have to do is just to guide the groups to discuss, come up with the particular issues, and those particular needs, what are the details? What kind of issues come up? So for the different indicators and education, these are the several things we mentioned. But maybe just to remind you, Doyle and Gore, one main concept that they came up with was the level of harm. If the needs are not met, the people, there's a level of harm below which there's a level below which the community will be harmed if those needs are not met. So for water, for education, for example, those who are doing very well above the green line, they have education up to university level. They can afford extra tuition for their children. Their children are in academies, for example. They have guaranteed employment. But below the level, below harm, they lack morale for school children. They cannot afford fees. Children have no time to study, need to support parents in other duties because of levels of poverty. Kids are distracted from going to school and doing other things other than going to school. So that's what we call the harm, the level of harm. When it's not met below that, things are really bad. For water, for example, those who are doing well above the green line use treated water. They have tap water. They rarely get sick from waterborne diseases. But below that, they depend on free water from borehole and dirty borehole water for drinking and wash. But for the other people, they have very clean water. It's well treated, and they rarely get affected. Now, in linking ecosystem services to human well-being using this approach, there are several advantages that we have with this particular approach. It expands our thinking of system services contribute to well-being because it uncovers certain unhidden connections. When you discuss with people and these issues come up, you find that there are many things that you don't know. So you have to just listen to them, document the process, and get to understand how do these issues affect them. It also allows us to look at trade-offs that occur between different aspects of well-being, and it's also a pro-poor approach. It's sensitive to the poverty issue and so on. It can allow for policy screening and make them to the poor and marginalized in society. That approach helps us to look at policy. What do they have? What do they offer? Are they sensitive to the living people, for example? There are limitations, of course. It doesn't look at the basic needs in isolation. You cannot look at basic needs in isolation. You have to look at it as part of wider understanding of other things. It ignores subjective well-being. Well-being requires more qualitative aspects to understand the mechanisms that are important for living well. I think I'll not go into this, but what happened with this research is that when we are doing the needs issue, it built into developing our questionnaire because now we are able to generate questions around those issues of harm, at what level harm is created. So in our survey now, the social survey that was conducted, we are able to now generate a few questions to ask, how are these needs met? By asking, what is the main source of water, for example? Does it get treated, yes or no, something like that? And then from that, we'll now be able to understand how these needs are met or not met.